Hello, and welcome to Legends, the Untold Story. There's no denying the link between Africa and the vast majority of Bahamians. Now, for the next two shows, we're highlighting two people who have actually taken the forging of relations and ties between Africa, specifically Ghana and the Bahamas, to the next level. My first guest is born Christopher Davis, but he has been coronated John Kanu II. And here to give you his full Ghanaian name is
Nana Asafuhini John Kwao II.
Welcome to Legends. Now, you have really, you and others, but you principally have taken the relationship between Ghana and the Bahamas, and where most Bahamians really come from.
Right, yep.
All right, to a higher level, and people are now getting more interested in finding out about it. How did you get started to get an interest in Africa, and how the Bahamas is part of Africa, and how the ties between the countries were sort of separated, but now coming back together?
All right, certainly. So, in my late teenage years, early manhood, I certainly started to lean towards Pan-Africanism. I had a lot of friends who were Rastafarians, listening to artists like Capleton and Sizzler, and it really did have a profound impact on me. And I started to go in that way. And before I knew it, like in my early 20s, I sort of became well-versed in issues of Pan-Africanism, kind of leaning towards history. And my father one day, I pretty much asked him, I think I might have been about 24 or 25, and I was like, how come no one ever focused on our African heritage or wrote a book on it? And he pretty much sucked his teeth and was like, why you don't do it, right?
Now we should tell people who don't know that your father is the Prime Minister,
right,
Philip Davis.
Right, certainly. And even growing up, I remember he would send me to Kid Island for weeks at a time, no Nintendo, to stay with my beloved Uncle Mervyn, who is no longer with us, unfortunately. And I remember him, they have a working toilet in the house now, but he still used to make me go use the bathroom in the bush just so I could feel, what
I appreciate that,
certainly. Yeah. And I remember going on car rides with my father, wanting to listen to a certain station whose name would not be called, and my father stubbornly almost forcing me and my little sister to listen to Phil Stubbs, Ronnie Butler, Tony McKay, D-Mark, particularly the Kid Island artists, right? And for some reason with the music, I'm not too musically inclined or talented myself, but that music really resonated with me. And when I would hear some of these things, they would stick with me, and I would paint this sort of picture in my head, and it would really stick with me. So some of those songs, particularly like from Phil Stubbs and Tony McKay, I know them word for word to this day, because I sort of so heavily indoctrinated in it.
Let me ask you about you though, because we're talking about Ghana and Africa, and Cat Island, well, one has some of the greatest entertainers, musicians, actors, but storytellers, really.
Right.
But there's also a great spiritual side in Cat Island.
Certainly.
Real, and there's the mythical side, but
Certainly.
there's somewhere in between that's really the reality.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that a greater sense of the tie to Africa is in Cat Island than any other island in this country?
Yeah, certainly, but not just, I wouldn't say any other island, I'd almost do it as sections, but in terms of the entire island, I would certainly say so. But what you do have places like, of course, South Andros, you have places like Black Point in the Exuma Keys.
Where Pompey and all
right,
that.
oh yeah, Southern Elutra, these West End, Grand Bahama, the island of Auckland, these are also huge African strongholds as well. But of course, we know that Cat Island has that preserved history.
Right.
You also find that a lot of the so-called liberated Africans, also known as displaced Africans, were settled in Cat Island as well. And so Cat Island has, to put it this way, a much fresher African presence and seems to be closer to the continent, not just geographically, but culturally as well.
Now, so you're listening to Capleton and all these different artists from the diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora.
Right.
And what happens after that?
So then I started to, I would talk about these things, get in these reasoning sessions, but, and I noticed people started to kind of shut up and listen to what I had to say. And, friends and family members even encouraged me that, hey, bro, you should really pursue this. And then I started to say, well, it was Dr. John Henry Clark, one of my favorite historians. Just to give you an example, I think painting this picture would let you see where I'm coming from. Essentially, he made a statement, and he was like, every single place that had slavery of African people also had some form of a maroon society. And of course, I came in and I said, oh no, he ain't right about that. He ain't right about that. And since that day, I've actually been able to identify 4 maroon societies at varying degrees here in the Bahamas, right?
Where?
And so that is what sort of, I just wanted to bring the struggle close to home. What is the Bahamas' role in the struggle? And I found out that it was one that was absolutely fascinating, and that we were involved in the global Pan-African movements. You have sections of the UNIA in Florida that had 100%, not 99, 100% Bahamian membership.
Wow.
And so we were on the front lines from the beginning since Columbus landed here. And that led, of course, to the extinction of our indigenous people. And we've always been sort of on the front lines to colonization, yet and fought against said colonization as well. And of course, this sort of deliberate stripping of our identity and history even removed us from it, right? And so to quote a very common and popular term in the modern history of the Bahamas, and though, of course, I love Doris Johnson and what she represents, but I think she was the one who popularized the term, and it was the name of her book, The Quiet Revolution. But I argue that the revolution actually wasn't so quiet. When you look at Inagua in the 1930s, where the people who were treating blacks unfairly, paying them low wages, they pretty much ran them off the island of Inagua. About at least 5 people died in the Burma Road uprising, called the Burma Road Riot. You have the Valiant Three, Virginia Roll and Glenette Roll and Adelina Bristow. These 3 women who stood up against something that has disenfranchised every black Bahamian and even some white Bahamians. When we're talking about the massive land thefts that were committed by the white oligarchy in the past. As I mentioned, that even affects some white Bahamians. So I've spoken to white Bahamians who have had land, particularly in the Family Islands, appropriated by these huge tycoons. And so we have to understand that racism is a global thing, and it isn't like the Bahamas is so special in that it didn't exist here, and it doesn't continue to exist here and manifest in a myriad of ways as well. That's what got me into the whole thing, starting to see these things. Why is this way? Why is this that way? Why we all have these European last names? These were questions I started to ask myself since we were young. Why do we tend to, many of us have a disdain towards our Haitian brothers and sisters to the south, when they were the ones that pretty much brought forward
in the region.
independent emancipation for everybody, right? So all of these were questions that irked me and pained me, even caused me to lose sleep at night. And that has caused the African history of the Bahamas to become not just a passion, but almost an obsession for me.
Wow. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the special title you hold.
Yes.
That really no one else has, outside of Ghana,
Nope, no one has.
Stay with us. We are speaking with Christopher Davis, Nana Asafo Haney.
Yes.
Stay with
Got
us.
it.
Welcome back. We are talking about renewing ties in many different ways with Ghana and the continent of Africa by extension. And with me, Nana Asafo Haney, Christopher Davis, who has been coronated John Kanu II.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, that is a very long story that I will try to compress in the short time that we have, right? But essentially, it led to me making a commitment to research our African history, our African heritage, African customs, to research and find as many connections. Of course, paramount to achieving that would be finding out about this junk canoe thing that we do, which is clearly African. You could look at it and see it. Nobody needs to write a book about it.
And the
or
music
say
is,
anything.
it's
The
all
music,
there.
the instruments, the way we move, who we are. You could see it on our faces. It's African. However, we've always had this myth about John Canoe being an enslaved man that came to the Bahamas, begged the British government, and they let us do it. Some of the myth even say that we started doing John Canoe to entertain our enslavers. But my research, I wasn't even the first one to make this connection. I was just the first one to prove it. Because other researchers had always said that, okay, well, this guy, John Canoe, is this great king from southwest Ghana. And then I discovered that he was the king in Princess Town, which is a beautiful, beautiful village in southwest Ghana, where there's a German fort, the fort that he actually overtook. And essentially, I made some calls around, and the first time I went was actually with my wife, at the time Tamara Scovello, now Tamara Davis, or I should say Queen Mother, Tamara. And we went the first time, and we first made this discovery. And then my wife went with me again, along with my partner, who is now living over there, the logistician and Pan-Africanist Robin Lightbourne, who has been doing tremendous work over there as well. And that was when we really solidified it. And when I came home, I made calls around the John Canoe community, sort of put my ear on the ground. But I knew that I needed somebody that loves John Canoe, would die for John Canoe, knows about the parade, knows all the ins and outs of the modern John Canoe parade, something that me myself is not as well versed in, though I am well versed in it, but I wouldn't call myself an expert in that field. And many, many names popped up, but one name that kept on popping up was Angelique McKay. Now, Queen Mother Angelique McKay. And one of the things that struck me with her, it didn't take, just the first time we ever had a conversation, the first time we met, and I was being very, polite and all of that. And essentially, I told her out the gate, I said, listen, I think I found something huge on the origins of John Canoe. And before I even explain it, she's like, you know what, I coming. He's like, I ain't nothing. When the trip is, all of that, I coming. And we all went pretty much out of our own pockets. With minimal to no government support at that time. And that was one of the real first meaningful trips. It was me, my wife, Tamara, Queen Mother Angelique, Robin Lightbourne, of course, Dr. Michael Pateman, who at the time now is the Cultural Ambassador, Dean of Heritage and Museums as well, as Oswald White, aka Ras Copper, who is a Bahamian reggae artist, and we brought him, of course, to represent the Nyabingi community, and he's one of the local leaders of the Nyabingi community, staunch Pan-Africanist. And so I saw it almost as like a dream team of people going over there. We were doing a lot of humanitarian work, of course, doing a lot of research, meeting a lot of people, making more discoveries, like, for example, Sorcy. We go on there bragging like we know about Sorcy. We don't know nothing about Sorcy. Them people over there. Sorcy above their door. Sorcy is bracelets around their wrists and all of these, but all sorts of intricate spiritual meanings behind it as well. And then all of a sudden, we met some good brothers over there too. Got a shout out, the guy we call Honorable. He's the former mayor of two villages over there. Stephen Kenya Arthur, also known as Niami Bekri. His parents named him God is Great. That's what Niami Bekri means. Yeah. Others like, of course, Samuel Akpo. Of course, we have the Ambassador Wilson over there as well, whose appointment was very much tied to all of the work that we've been doing. And he was one of the people in the early stages when we first started traveling, who was over there, who we sort of connected with as well. It's just many parts. But in a nutshell, what happened was, all of a sudden, I was summoned by the king.
This is the king of
Ahanta, right? As to be
region.
specific, Otumfo, which means like great king, overlord, Baidu Bonsu, the 15th. So remember that name, Baidu Bonsu, because it will come in later on, I'm sure, in the segment. But he was the one that coronated me. He summoned me.
I'm just wondering, how did they select you? How did that happen?
Oh, well, this is a lot went into it.
How long
Right.
were you in Ghana for that time?
This was probably by the 5th or 6th trip.
Okay.
In about a year or a year and a half.
So they've been familiar with you.
Right, they see it, we keep coming back. And even so, my good brother, Alex Kofi, You know, I consider him one of my best friends today, and he was the guy who I met, who is one of the local oral historians in Princestown. And, you know, he even was telling me about this, and it was just so profound, it's difficult to put in words. But one of the things that the Hunter people believed was that when their brothers and sisters who were taken in the transatlantic slaves trade begin to return home, that is when they will be great again. It is a very underdeveloped section of Ghana, but it also produces more than 40% of the GDP. So the oil fields, the gold, all of these minerals are in this region. And the Hunter region has more forts than any other single province in all of West Africa. So I was just being myself. We were doing a lot of stuff, like, so we go to a certain place and see that, hey, the school needs to be painted, or hey, the classrooms are naked, they don't have this. So we've given tablets to educators, laptops to different educators as well. I don't like to self-aggrandize and brag too much on that side of stuff that we do, but this was the type of stuff that we were doing, and we do it quietly because we understand the complexities of aid and all these things in Africa, which is actually extremely harmful. So this is not that. This is just us helping our brothers and sisters who we know that gave us John Canoe. And then they had these ceremonies which are very intricate, and a lot of strange things were happening in these ceremonies, right? And essentially, within these ceremonies, they have their last great king, Badu Bonsu II, and being summoned by him or being allowed to view his remains is one of their greatest honors. Mm-hmm. You had people who...
And I'm sure very few people even given that privilege.
Exactly, very, very few. And when we went there on our first trip together as a group of Bahamians, they did the ceremony. When the ceremony began, there were maybe 20, 30 people there. By the time the ceremony ended, like half the village was there. We're talking about probably over 1,000 people maybe, but there's a lot of people.
And there's a special reason behind that, eh?
Right.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about the ceremony because I want people to see and understand clearly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back. Stay with us. There's more to come. Good, welcome back. Now, we were talking about this very special coronation and some very special and mystical things that happened during it.
Yes.
Please fill us in.
And so, back to this ceremony. So the ceremony essentially ended with us being given permission to view the remains of the great whale, as they call him, also known as King Badu Bonsu II.
And his remains were what? I mean, this is...
So he, like John Canoe, fought against the transatlantic slave trade, and because of it, he was beheaded by the Dutch, and his head was sent to Europe for scientific research. The head went missing for a number of years, almost a century and a half, and then it was discovered in 1979 at the Lehman's Medical Center up the road from The Hague, ironically. It wasn't returned until 30 years later in 2009, though I don't want to say where it is now, but it's not with the Ahanta people. And we've also been involved in an initiative to get his remains properly interned and returned home, as well as seeking reparations from Holland for it. And that's in its beginning phases, but I'm sure we'll be successful. That ceremony was to be given the allowance to go and see him. There are hundreds of people in Ahanta who are directly descended from this great king who have never been allowed or given permission to see it. And we didn't realize this until after. When we came with the other Bahamians, all of these people, many of us, dozens of us, got to see him. And some of them who are descended from him never got to see him until we were there. And so it was a very powerful, I don't want to call it omen, but a very powerful blessing in a sense that it really put us on a cultural, I wouldn't want to say pedestal, but it put us in a different cultural light. And then in 2022, the decision was made to coronate me as John Canoe II. I had two coronations actually, one in the village of Princestown, done by the elders of Princestown, chiefly my sort of, I have two fathers now. I have an adoptive Ahanta and Zimmer Ghanaian father who was Chief Abu Sipin, means family head, Augustine Yao, right, who was very close to me. And he coronated me the first time just in the village, and then it was done by the great king, and that was the one that was a huge spectacle. Jamal Rule came over, the incoming ambassador was there, of course, the first lady was there. This coronation actually happened on Father's Day in 2022, and I was so disappointed my father couldn't be there. Of course, he had other obligations, but my mother was there. And now the Ahanta people, this is the tribe that John Canoe and John Canoe comes from. They are matrilineal, and they kind of crack a joke with me like, "Well, we don't need your mother, we don't need your father, we only need your mother anyway," right? And this is what led to me being crowned. So to put it simply, the family, the kingdom, the tribe of the actual man, John Canoe, who we celebrate because he fought against the transatlantic slave trade. And the first two ships, one owned by Governor Fenney, the other one owned by Woodes Rogers, brought his warriors directly to the Bahamas. This is why, though many went to Jamaica and other places, this is why we have this special connection and love for this man, John Canoe.
I really want you to tell our viewers that, if you can,
Yeah.
if you think you cannot say it, I understand why, but
Certainly.
tell us about that really powerful situation that occurred.
Right, so
That was kind of supernatural.
yeah, so I ain't calling people name, but there were people who went over there with us who who don't believe in much. They were agnostic at best. One person in particular was with us. His chair broke 4 or 5 times, and this is not a big, really big guy.
It just started-
Just kept on breaking. And it was like a huge running joke, and it's just like, oh, the ancestors know.
So cracking or falling apart, I mean,
And one incident, it was like someone took a bat and hit the chair, because like the 3 of the legs just like shot it. And like a generic plastic outdoor chairs we talking about. So these aren't even like wooden chairs. These like the generic plastic outdoor chairs. Some of them were the foldable chairs. This isn't a big fat guy or anything like that. And the chair just kept on collapsing. Another thing that happened, interestingly, was bats. They believed that the souls of their warriors enter bats. And everywhere we were going, bats just happened to be there. And at the place where the remains of Baidu Bonsu were at, they had to cut down all of the trees in that section because they had been overrun with bats.
wow.
And when we even went to Kumasi, which is where John Canoe was never a slave. He went into refuge in a city called Kumasi, which today is the Ashanti capital. Founded a section of that city known as Kwadaso, which means the golden calabash, speaking to his wealth and his generosity. And we were supposed to watch a football match between Nigeria and Ghana. No rooms were available in Kumasi, so we stayed in Accra. We decided to go the following day. Still no rooms. We driving all around the village. We stood up to this hotel and went inside. When I went inside to pay, I looked at the back, and the hotel was in Kwadaso, and we weren't even trying to go there. This is a major city with, I think, 4 million people, massive city, bigger than Miami. And we just happened to stumble upon Kwadaso, where John Canoe was actually from.
Wow.
And what you think was in them trees, right in the courtyard of the hotel where we were staying?
Those bats?
Bats.
Wow.
You see, and at that point, I was just over. This was after my coronation and all that. I was just overwhelmed. I was just overwhelmed.
I can imagine. Tell me
Yes,
now,
yeah,
the thing
I
is,
just overwhelmed,
because, all right, the vast majority of us are Christian here
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Bahamas, but that doesn't mean that you have to reject either form of spirituality, right?
This-
How do you combine them?
So this is what
Because they would all be part of us.
Oh yeah, so visiting the Ahanta region is probably one of the best places you will see that. So first of all, we have to realize right is right and wrong is wrong, right? When we look at history in its totality, the people who called themselves Christians and the people who did any form of traditional African religion, which ones were the victims? Who raped who killed who stole whose land? You understand? So
Absolutely.
who was right and who was wrong in that scenario, regardless of your belief. Just because they pray into Jesus don't make them right for raping and killing and enslaving these people, right? So now let's put that on the side. When you visit the Ahanta region, let's talk about Sorasi, one of the huge clues that we got in the Ahanta region. They use Sorasi above their doors and all this. They have a profound belief in it, and this is why we believe in it in a nutshell. You go to church, you go to some place with the church of the holy water, you get Sorasi in the holy water.
Oh,
That same ceremony, we went to a church service that same weekend, And one of the same fellas who was in the ceremony was the pastor of the church. You see? So when we look at words like Obeah and all of these things, Obeah, and my research shows that it actually comes from an English word, obey. And this was what was planted on us. So your Grammy, say 100 years ago, could have been charged with Obeah simply for boiling a pot of sorcery to make you feel better, because the Europeans misunderstand these things, right? Now, culturally, this is how we do things. Now, in the Bahamas, most of us are actually, say, Baptist or non-denominational. When you look at the way that we worship, culturally, it's African. You know, we even have a joke that's like a running national joke between Anglicans and Baptists, you know. So if you do a nice short prayer, they say that's Anglican prayer, you know. The Baptists feel like, oh, well, you're all worshiping like, oh, the English is not too solemn and boring for me. And then the Anglicans feel like their service a little too long and a little too loud for them, right? But at the end of the day, it's our African heritage, African culture. ASU is another form of our African heritage and our African culture. We have just been conditioned to selectively choose aspects of African culture to label as evil, to label as this, or to label as that or the other, right?
We're going to have to close this segment out now, but we have a 2-minute segment coming up, and I'm going to let you say whatever you think we need to know before we close out. Stay with us, there's more to come. Welcome back. We're in our final segment with Christopher Davis, and we covered a lot, but we have a lot more to cover.
Certainly.
What do you think Bahamians need to know most as we move forward? You got a minute to tell me that.
Oh, well, let's just get into this. John Canoe was not an enslaved man that came to the Bahamas. He was a great warrior king who fought against the transatlantic slave trade and had many victorious and military feats against particularly the British, the Dutch, and the Prussians, also known as the Germans, the Danish, and others. His legacy came to the Bahamas on the slave ship Bahama Galley, which were actually full of his warriors, his actual warriors and family members that came here, and that simultaneously doubled the black population of the Bahamas, setting this cultural foundation of the Bahamas that comes from Africa, almost exclusively belonging to the Ahanta people. The origins of John Canoe comes from a continuance of Akan militarism, and you see that it's attached to the Maroon communities of Jamaica, attached to Kwamino, the revolutionary of the Bahamas, who attempted to overthrow the entire island and make it an African colony, as colonial records described it. Also at Clifton Heritage National Park, where I'm the manager responsible for all things heritage, exhibits, and tours, we have now further solidified our connections to Ghana. You may know, of course, the great Vivian Wiley, 5 times great-grandson of Cujo Wiley, a displaced African who came there as a child and lived there. We have people from the Ewe, the Ga, the Fante, and the Ahanta people, and all of these profound connections to Ghana. There's an Adinkra symbol that translates as hand come, hand go. And these are sayings that we have: Sorasi, ringing cowbells in John Canoe, the Gombe drum.
And where's the best place for people who want to do more research for themselves too? Which, I mean, several websites, etc.
Right. So
what's the best one?
Depends on what you're researching, but just to throw a few out there, you have one of my great sources is actually slavevoyages.org. And you can type in different ports at different time periods and see where these ships came from, and even the ports of Africa where many of our ancestors arrived from. You also, of course, have, you have to Google it, but it's a section of the website of the University College of London called Legacies of British Slave Ownership. I have a lot of fun on that website. You can actually go there, go on the search, type in your name, and you could find and begin to trace the wealth that was produced by the labor of your ancestors in slavery. Wow. And when you look at families like Moss, families like Roll, you will be surprised to see the impact that the labor had, you know. And so for Bahamians, we have to remember who we are. Who we are actually African. Bahamas is our geopolitical loyalty, but the way God made you is African.
Well said. And I guess we should all be saying Asante Sana, eh?
Yeah.
Christopher Davis, wonderful to see you,
Thank
man.
you.
Great.
Yes,
and thank you for the work you're doing.
Yes, thank you.
It's awesome. And we'll see you next time on Legends. Stay tuned for the second half of this, where we deal with the Queen Mother, Angelique McKay.